The year was 2157, and Earth had changed a lot since the old days. Humans were no longer alone in the universe. For the past 30 years, they had been part of something called the Galactic Alliance, a group of different alien species who worked together. Many aliens now lived on Earth, and humans lived on other planets too. Frank Morrison did not like this one bit. He had been a police officer in New Washington, D.C. for 15 years, and he remembered when the city was filled with only humans. Now, walking through his patrol sector, he saw aliens everywhere. The ones he hated most were the Zaxians, tall, reptile-like beings with scales that changed color based on their mood. The Zaxians had opened a new embassy in his patrol area 3 months ago, and Frank thought about requesting a transfer every day since. Dispatch to Officer Morrison, his radio crackled. We have reports of a traffic incident near the Zaxian embassy. Possible vehicle breakdown causing congestion. Frank sighed and tapped his radio. Morrison responding, on my way. He drove his patrol car toward the embassy, his mood getting darker with each block. When he arrived, he saw the problem, right away. A large black vehicle with diplomatic plates had stopped in the middle of the road. Several cars were backed up behind it. What made Frank's blood pressure rise was the sight of a Zaxian standing next to the vehicle, its scales flashing orange and blue. But there was someone else there too, a human woman in an army uniform with colonel rank insignia. She was talking to the Zaxian and seemed to be helping with the vehicle. Frank parked his car and approached them, his hand resting near his weapon. "What's going on here?" he asked, not bothering to hide the annoyance in his voice. The woman turned around. She was in her 40s with dark hair pulled back in a tight bun. Her uniform was perfect, showing many medals and ribbons. "Colonel Samantha, Wright, U.S. Army," she said, standing tall. "Ambassador Zex's vehicle had a mechanical failure. I was in the motorcade behind and stopped to assist. We've called for diplomatic service, but it might be a few minutes." Frank looked past her at the Zaxian. "Is that thing giving you trouble, ma'am?" Colonel Wright's expression hardened. "Officer, Ambassador Zex represents one of Earth's most important allies. Please address him with proper respect." The Zaxian's scales shifted to a deep purple. Frank had learned enough about them to know this meant concern or discomfort. "I am causing no trouble, officer," Ambassador Zex said in perfect English. "Colonel Wright has been most helpful." Frank didn't trust the alien. He never did. In his mind, they were all hiding something. "Step away from the human, sir," he said, moving his hand to his weapon. "Officer Morrison," Colonel Wright said, reading his name badge. "There is no threat here. Stand down." But Frank saw the Zaxian move a clawed hand toward what looked like a pocket, and years of prejudice took over his training. He drew his weapon. "Hands where I can see them," he shouted. "Officer, he's reaching for his identification." Colonel Wright stepped between Frank and the ambassador. Frank saw only a threat, an alien reaching for something and a human who didn't understand the danger. His finger squeezed the trigger. The shot rang out across the street. Colonel Wright jerked backward, a look of shock on her face as her right shoulder blossomed red. She fell against the side of the diplomatic vehicle. For a moment, everything was silent. Then chaos broke loose. The Zaxian ambassador's scales turned bright red as he caught Colonel Wright before she hit the ground. "Medical assistance now," he shouted. Frank stood frozen, his gun still pointed. In his mind, he had been protecting a fellow human from an alien threat. But as he saw the colonel's blood spreading across her uniform while the alien applied pressure to her wound, the reality of what he had done began to sink in. Sirens wailed in the distance. Within minutes, the street was filled with emergency vehicles, more police officers and military personnel. Frank found himself disarmed and sitting in the back of a police car, watching as medics worked on Colonel Wright. Captain Laura Bell, Frank's supervisor, stood outside the car, her face pale with anger. "Do you have any idea what you've done, Morrison?" she asked, her voice shaking. "That's Colonel Samantha Wright, the military liaison to the Galactic Alliance. She's a hero from the Orion conflict, and you just shot her while she was protecting an ambassador." Frank said nothing. He watched as Colonel Wright was loaded into an ambulance, the Zaxian ambassador insisting on accompanying her. News drones were already hovering overhead. Frank knew that within hours, everyone on Earth would know what happened. But it was worse than that. Captain Bell's next words confirmed his fear. The Galactic Alliance has a direct feed of this. Every species in the Alliance just watched a human police officer shoot another human who was protecting an alien diplomat. This isn't just an incident, Morrison. This is a galactic situation. As Frank was driven away from the scene, he caught sight of a group of Zaxians and humans gathered outside the embassy. They were watching him with expressions ranging from anger to disappointment. Among them was a young human boy standing next to a Zaxian child, both looking confused about why an officer would hurt someone trying to help. In the military hospital across town, Colonel Wright was rushed into surgery. Admiral Catherine Powell arrived within the hour, her face grim as she viewed the security footage of the shooting. "How bad is it?" asked Major Greg Harris, Wright's second in command. "The wound isn't life-threatening," Admiral Powell replied, "but the diplomatic damage might be. The Zaxian High Council is demanding an explanation. 3 other Alliance species have already called emergency meetings, and the news is spreading to every corner of human space." On the hospital view screen, they could see protests beginning outside the New Washington Police Department. Humans and aliens stood side by side, holding signs demanding justice. "This isn't just about one officer's actions," Admiral Powell said, watching the crowds grow. "This is about whether humanity has really changed enough to be part of the galactic community." Major Harris nodded slowly. "What happens now?" "Now," Admiral Powell said, "we show the galaxy that humans hold themselves accountable. Officer Morrison will face trial, and the whole universe will be watching." In his holding cell, Frank Morrison sat alone, replaying the moment over and over in his mind. For the first time, he began to wonder if the threat he had seen was only in his head. The shooting of Colonel Samantha Wright spread across Earth and to all 47 worlds of the Galactic Alliance in less than a day. On the Zaxian homeworld, crowds gathered outside the human embassy, their scales flashing angry red and orange. The Zaxian government called back their ambassador from Earth and sent a clear message. Justice must happen, or they would cut all ties with humans. In the military hospital, Colonel Wright woke up from surgery. Her shoulder was wrapped in a healing bandage, and her arm was in a sling. Admiral Catherine Powell sat next to her bed, looking at reports on a small screen. "How bad is it?" Colonel Wright asked, her voice still weak. Admiral Powell put down her screen. "The doctor says you'll recover fully in a few weeks." "That's not what I meant," Colonel Wright said. Admiral Powell sighed. "It's bad. The Zaxians are furious. 3 other Alliance species have threatened to pull out of trade agreements, and the video of your shooting has been viewed by billions across the galaxy." "It was just one man's actions," Colonel Wright said. "Most humans aren't like Officer Morrison." "The galaxy isn't sure about that," Admiral Powell replied. "This incident has brought up all the old fears about humans. They're saying we're still too violent and ruled by our prejudices." A nurse came in with a message. "Admiral, the Galactic Alliance Council is requesting to speak with Colonel Wright if she's able." Colonel Wright nodded. "I can talk to them." A large screen lowered from the ceiling. On it appeared 7 beings of different species, the leaders of the Galactic Alliance Council. In the center was High Counselor Nex of the Varians, a tall, thin being with pale blue skin. "Colonel Wright," said High Counselor Nex, "we are relieved to see you recovering. The Council wishes to express our concern over this attack." "Thank you, High Counselor," Colonel Wright replied. "But I want to make it clear that this was the action of one person, not a reflection of humanity as a whole." "That remains to be seen," said another counselor, a Draxian with 4 arms folded across his chest. "This officer has exposed dangerous feelings that may still exist among your people. That's why his trial is so important," Admiral Powell cut in. "We will show the galaxy that humans hold themselves accountable." The Zaxian counselor leaned forward. "Ambassador Zex reports that the officer shot you because you were protecting a Zaxian. Is this correct?" Colonel Wright nodded. Officer Morrison appeared to see Ambassador Zex as a threat, when he was simply reaching for his identification. I stepped between them. A human risking their life to protect an alien, the Zaxian counselor said, his scales shifting to a thoughtful blue. This part of the story is not getting enough attention. High Counselor next nodded. The Council has decided that this case will be a test of humanity's place in the Alliance. We will send observers to the trial. If justice is served, relations can continue. If not, he didn't need to finish the sentence. Everyone knew what was at stake. After the call ended, Colonel Wright looked at Admiral Powell. No pressure then. Meanwhile, in space above Earth, the Earth Defense Force ship Intrepid received new orders. Captain Daniel Rodriguez read them with a growing sense of worry. Prepare for possible evacuation of human diplomats from Alliance worlds, the orders said. Be ready to move on short notice. Captain Rodriguez looked around his bridge. The Intrepid had a mixed crew. 30% were non-humans from various Alliance species. He could feel the tension in the air. His second-in-command, Lieutenant Lisa Chen, approached him. The crew is talking about the shooting, sir. Some of our alien crew members are worried. Tell everyone that on this ship we're all one crew, Captain Rodriguez said, but be alert for any problems. Later that day, in the ship's dining area, Captain Rodriguez noticed a human crewman sitting alone, away from a group of Zaxian engineers. The captain took his food tray and sat with the Zaxians. After a moment of surprise, they welcomed him. Soon, other human crew members followed his example. It was a small step, but an important one. Back on Earth, Frank Morrison sat in a cell watching the news on a small screen. He couldn't believe how big the situation had become. His face was everywhere, alongside pictures of Colonel Wright and Ambassador Zex, Officer Morrison, a guard said, opening his cell door. Your lawyer is here. A tall man in an expensive suit walked in. Richard Bennett, he said, offering his hand. I'll be representing you. Frank shook his hand. Can you get me out of this mess? Bennett sat down. It's not going to be easy. The district attorney is pushing for the maximum sentence, and the case is getting more attention than any trial in recent history. I was just doing my job, Frank said. Protecting people. Bennett looked at him carefully. The evidence doesn't support that. The ambassador was not a threat. Colonel Wright tried to tell you that. You don't understand, Frank insisted. These aliens, they're not like us. You can't trust them. Bennett's expression grew serious. That kind of thinking is exactly what got you here. And if you express those views in court, you'll only make things worse. Frank looked down at his hands. So what's our plan? We'll argue that it was a split-second decision made under pressure, Bennett explained. A mistake, not malice. It's the best we can do. In the days that followed, preparations for the trial moved quickly. The World Court in New Washington was chosen as the venue. For the first time in history, the proceedings would be broadcast live to every world in the Galactic Alliance. District Attorney Olivia Martinez assembled a strong team for the prosecution. As she reviewed the evidence, she knew this case was about more than one officer's actions. It was about humanity's values and their future in the galaxy. We need to show the Alliance that humans can face their problems honestly, she told her team. That we can recognize our flaws and work to overcome them. As the trial date approached, protests and debates happened across Earth. Most people supported Colonel Wright and demanded justice, but some groups defended Officer Morrison, saying he was being sacrificed for alien relations. The night before the trial, Colonel Wright, now released from the hospital, stood at the window of her apartment looking at the stars. She knew that somewhere up there, billions of beings were wondering if humans could really change, if they belonged among the stars. We have to prove them right, she whispered to herself. We have to be better. The day of the trial arrived with crowds gathering outside the World Court in New Washington. People held signs and banners, most calling for justice. Security was tight, with both human and alien peacekeepers working together to maintain order. Inside the courtroom, Judge Eleanor Washington took her seat. She was known for being fair and tough. The room was filled with reporters from Earth and across the galaxy. Special seats were reserved for the Galactic Alliance observers. 7 beings from different species who would watch the proceedings closely. One observer stood out. A Zaxian truthseer named Kellex sat near the judge's bench. Zaxians had a special ability to detect lies by seeing tiny changes in body heat and movement. After much debate, Kellex had been allowed to observe but not to testify. His presence made many humans uncomfortable, especially Frank Morrison. Frank sat at the defense table next to his lawyer, Richard Bennett. He wore a plain suit instead of his police uniform. Across the room, District Attorney Olivia Martinez organized her notes at the prosecution table. Judge Washington spoke, her voice firm. This trial will now begin. The whole galaxy is watching. I remind everyone that in this court we seek only truth and justice. After opening statements, the prosecution called their first witness, Colonel Samantha Wright. She walked to the witness. Stand, her arm still in a sling. She swore to tell the truth, then described what happened on that day. Ambassador Zex's vehicle broke down, she explained. I stopped to help because that's my job as liaison. When Officer Morrison arrived, he seemed upset from the start. The ambassador reached for his ID and Officer Morrison drew his weapon. I stepped between them to explain the situation, and he shot me. Richard Bennett stood to question her. Colonel, in high-pressure situations, mistakes can happen. Could Officer Morrison have genuinely believed you were in danger? Colonel Wright shook her head. No, I clearly identified myself and the ambassador. I told him there was no threat. He chose not to listen. Next, Ambassador Zex took the stand. His scales were a calm blue as he spoke. I have worked with humans for 7 years. Most treat me with respect. Colonel Wright has always been honorable. When Officer Morrison pointed his weapon, I was confused and afraid. Colonel Wright tried to protect me, and for that she was injured. During questioning, Bennett tried to suggest that Zaxian movements might seem threatening to humans who don't know them well. Ambassador Zex responded by showing how reaching for his identification was very different from any aggressive Zaxian gesture. The prosecution showed videos from Officer Morrison's body camera and nearby security cameras. The footage clearly showed Colonel Wright trying to de-escalate the situation before being shot. Dr. Paula Nelson, who treated Colonel Wright, testified next. The bullet damaged muscle and bone. With our current medical technology, she will recover, fully. But it was still a serious injury that could have been fatal if the bullet had hit just a few inches to the left. As the first day ended, public opinion seemed firmly against Frank Morrison. News reports showed protests on several Alliance worlds, with signs saying, "Justice for Wright," in multiple languages. On the second day, the prosecution called Officer Lisa Patel, who had worked with Frank Morrison for 3 years. Did Officer Morrison ever express negative views about non-humans? District Attorney Martinez asked. Officer Patel looked uncomfortable. Yes. He often complained about having to patrol near the alien embassies. Once he said that Earth was better before the aliens came. 3 more officers gave similar testimony, describing how Morrison had avoided alien residents when possible and made negative comments about them. Captain Laura Bell, Morrison's supervisor, testified about his work record. Officer Morrison had good performance reviews for human interactions, but had received 2 official warnings about his treatment of non-human residents. He was scheduled for additional training on interspecies relations the month after this incident occurred. By the 3rd day, the prosecution had built a strong case showing a pattern of prejudice, not just a single mistake. The defense began, presenting their side. Richard Bennett called several character witnesses who described Frank as a dedicated officer who had helped many people over his career. They spoke about times when he had risked his own safety to save others. Then Frank Morrison himself took the stand. He looked nervous as he was sworn in. The Zaxian truthseer watched him closely. Officer Morrison, Bennett began, please tell the court about your thoughts that day. Frank cleared his throat. I got a call about a situation near the Zaxian embassy. When I arrived, I saw Colonel Wright with the ambassador. From my angle, it looked like she might be in danger. When the ambassador reached toward his clothes, I thought he was going for a weapon. I reacted based on my training to protect a fellow human. During cross-examination, District Attorney Martinez was direct. Officer Morrison, isn't it true that you dislike aliens, particularly Zaxians? I've had concerns about security, Frank replied carefully. Please answer the question directly, Judge Washington instructed. Frank paused, then spoke quietly. Yes, I didn't trust them. And despite Colonel Wright clearly telling you the situation was under control, you chose to fire your weapon. Isn't that because you valued the Zaxian's life less than a human's? Martinez pressed. I thought I was protecting her, Frank insisted, but his voice wavered. In the gallery, the Zaxian truthseer's scales shifted to a deep red. He made a small note but said nothing, as was agreed before the trial. The defense's final witness was Dr. Robert Green, a psychologist who specialized in stress reactions. In high-pressure situations, people often fall back on ingrained biases and fears without conscious thought. This doesn't excuse the action, but helps explain how it happened. As the third day of the trial ended, both sides prepared for closing arguments. Outside the courthouse, the crowds had grown larger. News reports showed that over 20 billion beings across the galaxy were following the trial. That evening, in her chambers, Judge Washington reviewed her notes. She knew her decision would affect not just Frank Morrison's life, but potentially humanity's place in the galactic community. Justice needed to be served. But what exactly that meant was the question everyone was waiting to hear answered. In his holding cell, Frank Morrison stared at the ceiling, finally beginning to understand the full impact of what he had done. It wasn't just about one shot fired. It was about everything that led to that moment, all the thoughts and prejudices he had never questioned until now. The fourth day of the trial began with closing arguments. The courtroom was completely silent as District Attorney Olivia Martinez approached the jury. This case is about more than one bullet, she said, her voice clear and strong. It's about the thoughts that led to that bullet being fired. Officer Morrison didn't see Ambassador Zex as a person deserving the same respect and protection as a human. He saw him as a threat simply because he was different. This prejudice not only harmed Colonel Wright but endangered our place in the galactic community. She showed the body camera footage one more time. Colonel Wright clearly stated there was no danger. She identified herself as a military officer. Yet Officer Morrison chose to ignore her and fire his weapon. The evidence shows this wasn't a mistake made in the heat of the moment. It was the result of long-held prejudice that finally turned violent. Richard Bennett then presented the defense's closing argument. Officer Morrison has spent 15 years protecting the people of this city. Yes, he made a terrible mistake, one he deeply regrets. But he acted based on what he believed was a threat. We ask you to consider his whole career, not just this one moment. As Bennett spoke, many jurors looked unconvinced. The Zaxian truthseer's scales remained a steady red throughout the defense's argument. Judge Washington instructed the jury on the law, explaining the charges of assault with a deadly weapon and civil rights violations. You must decide based only on the evidence presented in this court, not on public opinion or potential consequences, she told them. The jury left to begin deliberations. Many people expected them to take days to reach a decision, but they returned after only 4 hours. The head juror, a woman named Patricia Adams, stood. We have reached a verdict, Your Honor. The courtroom grew tense. Reporters leaned forward. The Galactic Alliance observers watched closely. On the charge of assault with a deadly weapon, we find the defendant, Frank Morrison, guilty, Patricia announced. A murmur spread through the room. On the charge of violating civil rights based on species, we find the defendant guilty, Frank. Morrison closed his eyes. His lawyer placed a hand on his shoulder. Judge Washington thanked the jury and announced that sentencing would take place the following day. As Frank was led away, he caught sight of Colonel Wright sitting in the gallery. Their eyes met briefly before he was taken back to his cell. That evening, news of the verdict spread across Earth and to all Alliance worlds. On the Zaxian homeworld, crowds gathered in public spaces to watch the coverage. Their scales shifted, from angry red to thoughtful blue as they discussed what the verdict meant for human-Zaxian relations. Aboard the Intrepid, Captain Rodriguez called his crew together. Today's verdict is an important step, he told them. It shows that humans can recognize when we're wrong and hold ourselves accountable. I hope this helps heal some of the divisions this incident has caused. The alien crew members nodded in agreement. One Zaxian engineer spoke up. My people have always respected humanity's capacity for growth. Today proves that respect is well placed. The next morning, the courtroom was even more crowded for the sentencing hearing. Judge Washington allowed both sides to make statements. Before announcing her decision, Colonel Wright was invited to speak first. She stood tall, her arm no longer in a sling but still not fully healed. Your Honor, what happened that day changed more than just my body. It changed how aliens view humans and how we view ourselves. I don't seek revenge against Officer Morrison, but I do ask for justice that shows we take these actions seriously. Ambassador Zek spoke next. The Zaxian people believe that justice should serve three purposes: to punish wrongdoing, to protect society, and to allow for change. I ask the court to consider all three. Frank Morrison was the last to speak. He looked different from the first day of the trial, smaller somehow and more thoughtful. I have no excuse for what I did, he said, his voice quiet but steady. For years, I let fear of differences guide my actions. I didn't question my own thoughts. Because of that, I hurt Colonel Wright and damaged trust between humans and aliens. I'm truly sorry, though I know that doesn't fix anything. Judge Washington listened carefully to everyone. Then she sat silently for a long moment, considering her decision. When she finally spoke, her voice was firm. Frank Morrison, you have been found guilty of serious crimes. As an officer of the law, you were trusted to protect all people equally. Instead, you allowed prejudice to guide your actions, resulting in harm to Colonel Wright and damage to interspecies relations. The judge looked directly at Frank. I sentence you to 30 years in prison without the possibility of early release. Gasps spread through the courtroom. It was one of the harshest sentences given to a police officer in recent history. Judge Washington continued. This sentence reflects not only the physical harm caused, but also the breach of public trust and the damage to humanity's standing in the galactic community. Our laws must protect all sentient beings equally, regardless of species or origin. As Frank was led away, the Galactic Alliance observers huddled together, discussing the verdict in their own languages. The Zaxian representative approached Colonel Wright. The severity of this sentence will be seen as an important signal across the galaxy, the Zaxian said. It shows humans hold themselves to the same standards they expect of others. Outside the courthouse, the verdict was met with mostly approval. Some human groups protested, saying the sentence was too harsh, but they were far outnumbered by those who supported the judge's decision. News broadcasts showed reactions from around the world and beyond. On many Alliance planets, the verdict was being hailed as a turning point in human-alien relations. Today, humanity has demonstrated their commitment to justice beyond their own kind, said High Counselor Nex of the Galactic Alliance. This is an important step in their evolution as a species. Back in her office, Admiral Powell watched the coverage with Colonel Wright. Well, it's done, she said. Do you think it will make a difference? Colonel Wright looked thoughtful. One case won't change everything, but it's a start. It shows we can face our flaws honestly. The Zaxian government has withdrawn their threats to cut ties, Admiral Powell said. They're sending a new ambassador next month. As the sun set over New Washington, the news continued to discuss what the case meant for humanity's future. Most agreed on one thing. This verdict would be remembered as a moment when humans proved they could rise above their prejudices and truly belong among the stars. In his cell, Frank Morrison sat alone with his thoughts, beginning the long journey of understanding exactly how and why he had ended up there. 5 years passed since Officer Frank Morrison was sentenced to 30 years in prison. The galaxy had not forgotten the case, but many things had changed. Colonel Samantha Wright was now General Wright, the highest-ranking human in the Galactic Alliance military structure. She sat in her office on the top floor of the Alliance headquarters in New Washington, looking at the city spread out below her. The skyline had changed, with new buildings designed by both human and alien architects, standing side by side. Her assistant, a young Zaxian named Traz, entered the room. "General, the Security Council meeting begins in 30 minutes, and you received a message from Frank Morrison." General Wright nodded. "Thank you, Traz." After her assistant left, she opened the message. For the past 2 years, Frank Morrison had been writing to her from the rehabilitation center where he was serving his sentence. At first, she had ignored his messages, but eventually, she began to read them. Frank had changed during his time in prison. He had joined a program that taught inmates about different species and cultures. He had requested to meet with Zaxians and other aliens to learn about them firsthand. His latest message described how he was now helping other humans overcome their prejudices. "I will never be able to undo what I did," Frank wrote, "but I'm trying to prevent others from making the same mistakes. Your willingness to read my messages means more than you know." General Wright closed the message and prepared for her meeting. As Earth's representative on the Galactic Alliance Security Council, she was responsible for helping maintain peace across 27 star systems. Her experience had made her uniquely qualified for the role. The Security Council chamber was a large round room with seats for representatives from 12 species. Today, they were discussing a new treaty that would extend Alliance protections to 3 more worlds. "The right principle must be central to this agreement," said Councillor Zex, who had once been the ambassador Frank Morrison shot at. "All sentient beings must be guaranteed equal protection under Alliance law." The right principle had become the foundation for many Alliance policies since the trial. It stated that justice must extend equally to all beings regardless of their species or origin. Legal experts across the galaxy studied the Morrison case as an example of how a society could hold itself accountable. After the meeting, General Wright traveled to the spaceport where a new vessel was preparing for its maiden voyage. The ship was called the Alliance, and it was the first truly interspecies vessel in the Earth fleet. Its crew included humans and members of 11 other species. Captain Lisa Chen, the ship's commander, greeted General Wright at the entrance. "Welcome aboard, General. We're honored to have you here for our launch ceremony." "The honor is mine, Captain," General Wright replied. "This ship represents everything we've been working toward." They toured the vessel, visiting engineering where Zaxian technicians worked alongside humans, and the medical bay staffed by doctors from 3 different worlds. The ship combined the best technology from across the Alliance. As they walked, Captain Chen asked, "Is it true that you're going to visit Morrison next month?" General Wright nodded. "Yes. The Rehabilitation Center asked if I would speak to their interspecies understanding program. Frank will be there." "That can't be easy," Captain Chen said. "It's not," General Wright admitted, "but important things rarely are." Later that day, in the Northern Rehabilitation Center, Frank Morrison sat in a classroom with 15 other inmates. They were watching a recording of a recent Galactic Alliance meeting where General Wright had spoken about the importance of overcoming prejudice. "That's the woman you shot?" asked a younger inmate. Frank nodded. "Yes. And somehow she turned what I did into something that helped change the galaxy for the better." The class instructor, Dr. Maria Gomez, turned off the screen. "Frank has agreed to share his story with us today. His case is now taught in every law enforcement academy on Earth and many other worlds." Frank stood up slowly. At 52, he looked older than his years. 5 years ago, I made a decision that changed many lives, including my own. I let fear and prejudice control my actions, and it cost me my freedom. But it taught me something important, too." He looked at the mixed group of human and alien inmates. "We all have prejudices. The dangerous part is when we don't question them. When we assume our way of seeing things is the only right way." Across the galaxy on the Zaxian homeworld, a similar conversation was happening. Ambassador Trell, who had replaced Ambassador Zex, was speaking to a group of young Zaxians. "Humans are different from us in many ways," Trell said, his scales shifting to a thoughtful blue. "They are emotional and sometimes impulsive, but they also have an amazing capacity for change. The Morrison case proved this. When they recognized a problem in their society, they addressed it openly and took action." One young Zaxian raised a hand. "But one human shot another because of prejudice against us. Why should we trust them?" Because, Trell replied, they showed us that while individuals may fail, their society can still choose justice. That's what makes them valuable allies. Back on Earth, preparations were underway for the 5th anniversary of the verdict. It had become an unofficial holiday called Unity Day, when people remembered how close humanity had come to losing their place in the Alliance and renewed their commitment to interspecies cooperation. In New Washington Park, a simple stone monument stood where the shooting had happened. Engraved on it were words in 12 different languages. Justice knows no species. As evening fell, General Wright stood on the observation deck of the Alliance ship, watching Earth grow smaller as they prepared for their first mission. They would travel to a newly discovered world and help establish the first joint human-alien colony. "General," said a young officer, "we're ready for the jump to faster than light speed." "Thank you, Lieutenant," she replied. "Proceed when ready." As the stars blurred around them, General Wright thought about how far they had come. One terrible moment had nearly destroyed humanity's future among the stars. But their response to that moment had proven they deserved a place in the galactic community. The ship's crew moved around her, humans and aliens working together as equals. In the 5 years since the trial, mixed crews had become common. Children on Earth now grew up learning about alien cultures alongside human ones. The change had not been easy, but it had been real. In his cell, Frank Morrison added a final line to his journal before lights out. "I never thought my worst mistake would help create a better world. I'm still paying for what I did, and I should be. But knowing that something good came from it makes the days easier to bear." The galaxy continued to watch humanity's progress with interest. The species that had once been viewed with suspicion was now often cited as an example of how a civilization could confront its flaws and grow beyond them. As General Wright had said in her most famous speech to the Alliance Council, the true measure of advancement isn't in technology or power. It's in the willingness to recognize when we're wrong and the courage to do better. That's the journey humanity is on, and we invite all species to join us.